Another tragic killing, the shooting of Air Force vet Ashley Babbitt by a Capitol police officer whose identity has finally been revealed. His name is Lieutenant Michael Byrd, and of course he recently got the All-Star treatment on NBC News. But during his interview, he said something that caught our attention.
It was later I found out that the subject did not have a weapon, but there was no way to know that at that time. And I could not fully see her hands or what was in the backpack or what the intentions of. But they had shown violence leading up to that point.
But wait a minute, the media told us Byrd's actions were exonerated by the FBI and Capitol Police. How can that be with what he just said? Raising red flags? Well, here with me now is Jonathan Turley, George Washington University law prof and Fox News contributor. Jonathan, I know you watched this very closely. Your reaction to this, his statement, and does it blow up the whole he was exonerated narrative?
Well, it was an astonishing interview. I wrote about it in The Hill because he basically went through the list of what you're not allowed to do as the basis for lethal force. He said, I didn't see a weapon. I didn't know her intent. I didn't know what was on her back. I shot her. And, obviously, all of us can sympathize in being in a closed room in the middle of a riot. Babbitt was engaged in criminal conduct. She was illegally trespassing. She was disobeying police orders. There was a great deal of damage, and she was going through a window at that time. So all of that is criminal conduct, but you can't just shoot criminal trespassers. You can't shoot people damaging government property. You have to show an imminent threat to yourself or to others. And here you have an officer who actually says, I really couldn't see her hands. I didn't know if she was armed or not. According to that interpretation, he could have shot the next 20 people through the window. We could have shot hundreds of people that day on the Hill. But only one officer did so. That was Lieutenant Byrd. All the other officers, including officers who were attacked, who were injured, refrained from using lethal force. And I say that with a great deal of respect because we demand of officers a level of restraint and courage that most of us couldn't muster. It's a really difficult job. But what he described in the interview falls way outside, of the standard for use of lethal force.
Well, here's more from the NBC interview.
Based on your training, in that case, does it matter that the person was armed or not?
According to law, it does not. I know based on my training and my policy, what I did was appropriate.
Jonathan, all fine, according to his training.
Yeah, I don't know where that comes from. I've heard from officers around the country who couldn't believe the interview because it is true that you can use an authorized level of lethal force with someone who's unarmed if you believed they were unarmed and it was reasonable. We've had cases where officers thought someone was armed. Maybe they threw a weapon away seconds before. We had a case like that in Chicago. But he was describing something very different. He was saying he didn't have any idea whether she was armed. He had no idea what her intent was. All he knew is she was coming through a window against police orders. And under that argument, you could have shot hundreds of people in Seattle, Portland. There were police stations who were taken over. People went through those doors. Under this standard, every one of those protesters in Portland and Seattle that went into those government buildings destroying property could have been shot. Yeah, does that track? Right.
Yeah. No, it does. It's imminent bodily harm. Right? They have imminent coming through a window. You're essentially shooting blind when you can't see if there's any weapon. Jonathan, your piece was so important. Thank you. And coming up, if you thought Biden's Afghanistan response has been a disaster, well, wait until you see how he's handling the hurricane so far.